Hey everybody, it's Old Uncle Cardboard here, back with another episode of 5 Up, 5 Down, where I look at the 5 cards that got the best and the 5 cards that declined the most over the last week on MTG Arena. And this week, it's the beginning of a brand new format, so you know what that means. There's nothing to go up or down. It's the
Baseline Show! Welcome to the Baseline Show!
Here, what we're going to do is go over 17 lands by archetype and see which cards are doing what. So this is an example of one of the graphs that we're going to be looking at today, and you're going to see over here all of our game in hand win rates. So this is just how well you do when you draw this card, and at the bottom is where it's taken at. So 5.5 to like end of a pack down, off to the right. And so you can see where you can find value really quickly because you're going to look and you're going to go, okay, well, our card with the highest win rate in Azorius, we're going to start with Azorius, is this card all the way on the right. It's getting taken super, super late. And that card is Nurturing Presence. Nurturing Presence, come on down. You're number one common in Azorius. And I don't think anybody would have pictured this. Now, you have a lot of things going for it. First, you're creating a body, and it's a flying body in that. So it can wear a lot of these disturbed auras that you're bringing back. Additionally, it just brings another aura into your deck, and auras matter a lot of times in this deck. So Nurturing Presence is a card that I would have been a little meh on, and I think this might be a little bit of like small sample size theater. You're looking at only about 1,100, but I would definitely keep an eye on this because it looks like a massive overperformer right now. Next up, we have Scattered Thoughts, and this looks like about 59% game in hand win rate, which is great. And I think that speaks to the ability of this deck to really re-up while getting extra value out of Scattered Thoughts by being able to take those 2 cards that you're going to be discarding or, tossing in your graveyard, and then being able to get value out of them later by disturbing them. So Scattered Thoughts is another card that made a ton of sense for this deck, but ultimately I think that people are probably rating it a little bit low, and that really it's probably closer to a draw 2.5, draw 3 when you factor in all the value that you're going to be getting from Disturb. Next up, we have Sigarda's Imprisonment. And I think this was a card people were down on. I've definitely heard some people say that Exploit seems a little bit weaker than they initially thought. I think Ryan Sachs said that. So Sigarda's Improvement then goes up a little bit. I also think that we're finding out really quickly that blood tokens are more relevant than we thought they were going to be. It basically means that as long as you have a decent supply of them, you're not going to have to worry about flooding out. You're just pitching lands there. This is a deck that can use blood tokens because you can discard one of your disturb cards and get more value out of it later. All that said, the exile clause of a Sigarda's Imprisonment comes a little bit later, but I think at the end of the day, it's also really important to have answers to bombs in this format. On the other end of the spectrum, just kind of below that in our next card is Siphon Essence. And I think this speaks to how bomb heavy people feel this format is. Listen, if you don't have answers to some of these, like Averbrook Caretaker or just the bombiest bombs that are really hard to interact with once they're on the board, then go ahead and pick them off before they get here. Now, sure, it doesn't answer Hullbreacher Horror, for example, but this is a really relevant card that I want to have at least one copy of in any of my blue decks right now. I think you also get to create that blood token, which we're talking about. We're seeing a theme here that blood is increasing in relevance. So I think it's a card that you should definitely be on the lookout for. And then our fifth, and kind of it's in like a nice little cluster here, but Fierce Retribution, and everyone's picking this right where they should. I think that people were a little down on this card to start, thinking that most white decks want to be aggressive, but I feel like removal in general is a little clunky, and you've got a lot of people that are being pretty aggressive. When you look at Rakdos probably being one of the best archetypes, if not just flat out the best archetype, it's an aggressive deck, so you're fine just playing a Fierce Retribution 2, and then being able to have Cleave as an option in the late game for that unconditional removal. Some cards just to note in this next cluster, Kindly Ancestor is kind of what we thought it was. And over here we're seeing Chill the Grave. It looks like tempo is going to be really important if you're playing Azorius. And then over here, kind of later, Cradle of Safety. And Cradle of Safety makes sense again when we look at we want to be doing aura things in general. It's really important to protect the value when you're accumulating all of these auras on, say, like one kind of mega creature that is going in super hard. It's tapping things down, it's life linking, you're throwing an infantry on it, it's all kind of amassed there. Well, you have to be able to protect that. And I think that Cradle of Safety is pretty important. When it comes to cards that we're down on, obviously things in the bottom right hand corner that are like through the center of me in this zone are cards that everybody thought were going to be bad and are being picked late. So I'm way more interested in a card like this one right here, which is really far below kind of what we would expect as this average line, but is still being picked really high. And so here we have Griffrider. And Griffrider, I think, is pretty hard to train. Obviously, a lot of the cards that you're playing, especially the creatures that you're playing, aren't incredibly powerful. Sure, they, are usually getting in for 2 or 3, but there's not a lot of ways to train up Griffrider, so I'm really down on this card, and I think it's a pretty obvious cut in a lot of circumstances. We come over here, we're also going to see Evolving Wilds. That just, like, I don't care if you're playing Evolving Wilds or not. I don't think Evolving Wilds is like a really terrible card. I just don't think it's as impactful as others. Here we have Perish Blade Trainee. So we're seeing a theme right now. Training just seems to be kind of bad in Azorius, and that's fine. I don't think that, the deck is a bust if you're not training well enough. Next up for our underperformers, looks like it's Stitched Assistant. And that's a little bit surprising to me. I think that if you're playing something, I'm guessing this is like Lantern Bearer here. Yeah. Then you feel like you could get some value by exploiting your Lantern Bearers and drawing cards. Just doesn't seem like that's what the deck necessarily wants to do. I'm interested to see how that plays out. It's not too big of a, a gulf where, like Evolving Wilds or especially Perish Blade Trainee exist, but something to keep an eye on. You may be just a little too high on Stitched Assistant. Next up, and we have a pretty big sample size, Heron Blessed Geist. And this is a big surprise for me because this is the deck that should have the enchantment around that allows you to get the value out of Geist. I think you probably are looking to not just straight cast Heron Blessed Geist, but instead find a way to discard it. Maybe you're pitching it to Scattered Thoughts and then just getting the tokens out of it. And that can make it hard for the data to really understand how to evaluate the card. So Heron Blessed Geist, something, again, keep an eye on it. I think that's going to be a theme. And then Estwald Shield Basher, and this kind of makes sense. If training is bad and this is one of your better options to help train creatures, then yikes, we're also going to expect it to not be so hot. Now, it's a good target for your auras, but the play pattern I've seen is that people go to make it indestructible and then it dies in response. And there's nothing you're going to do about that. I'm sure you can try and put a cradle on it, but in general, I think Estwald's Shield Basher is kind of what we thought it was. Unless you have ways to really toughen up that butt, it's not going very far. Otherwise, we kind of have cards that are pretty close to where everybody thought. Binding Geist and Wretched Throng. And Throng is probably tough to evaluate because of, getting a critical mass of these, which is what you want to do. Data might just not have a really clean answer to it. Moving on to Orzhov, we have our top common, and it's Diregraph Scavenger by kind of a wide margin. You're looking at Diregraph Scavenger and then something that's super late, and I'm wondering if anybody at home is just screaming, I know what it is! Diregraph Scavenger, I think, was a card that smart players were really ahead of the curve on. This gives you an opportunity to exile something and gain life from that exile. A lot of times that's going to be a relevant creature in your opponent's graveyards. There's a lot of stuff that cares about what's going on in graveyards in this format. And so I think that people are probably too far down on this still. Having Death Touch is the real deal. Their boards can get really clogged up as far as I've seen so far. So having something that helps aid that clog while giving you life gain synergy seems great. Yeah, definitely just consider Diregraph Scavenger. Next up, we have Pointed Discussion, which is interesting. I think, again, we're talking about blood being better than we thought, being able to get ahead on cards. You don't really have a card draw to keep up sometimes with Orzhov, so definitely great there. And then you don't really care as much about the loss of life because you're gaining tons of life. You're life linking, you're doing it. So next up we have Sigarda's Imprisonment. Again, people just should be playing Sigarda's Imprisonment. Not much more to say about that. And what I'm going to note too is that a lot of cards are just right where we thought they should be in here. Perfectly evaluated thus far. Bleed Dry. Bleed Dry, though, looks like it's pretty close to on par with Blood Fountain. So here's a great value engine for you. You're going to get a blood token. Again, great. You're also going to be able to get these creatures back. So I think that there are a lot of kind of inefficient answers to creatures in this format, and being able to get back two of them so your opponent has to be doubly inefficient sounds great. And then in this next group, we're kind of just seeing Heron of Hope, which is amazing, especially if you can pair it with a Minister. I'm guessing Minister's probably getting appropriately drafted in this deck. Fierce Retribution, Kindly Ancestor. Is this Minister? There's Minister. We found it. We got there. And then Courier Bat. So just cards that you would expect to be pretty synergistic as well as removal are all kind of in this top range. Coming down, I think this is a pretty well-performing archetype because you're not seeing a ton of misevaluation, but one of the biggest misses looks like it is Dragskull Infantry. And not a big surprise here. I think you really have to have the cards to make Disturb work. You can't just throw in Disturb for free value, and you want to just be synergy, synergy, synergy when you're in Orzhov. We also have, coming in a little bit better, Griffrider. Again, I don't think Griffrider is a good card, and just adjust accordingly. Griffrider is looking like it's about even with Adamant Will, which most people would consider like a 23rd card, just a fine combat trick. So interesting. Next up, we have Desperate Farmer. And this is interesting. I mean, this feels like synergy, right? I just don't think that this deck has great opportunities for trades early where you're flipping your farmer consistently. And if you're not playing the farmer as the backside, then you're a little nervous because that's where all of your value comes from. So, you know, a 2/2 lifelink for 3, not great when you consider that something like Kindly Ancestor is just going to get you your value as soon as you can flip it. We've got Evolving Wilds again, which is just fine. And then kind of this cluster of like cards that don't really belong in this deck. You know, Perishblade Trainee, Rot-Tide Gargantua, and Doom Dissenter are all doing different things than you're trying to in Orzhov Life Gain. So next up, we have Boros, which is a deck that I just think is fine. It's just turning things sideways, and it looks like this kind of reflects that everybody's pretty much on with what they're putting in these decks. Up top is probably going to be a Braid. Yep, Braid, just really, really solid early interaction. It's one of the most efficient ways that you can get rid of creatures in this format, so go for it. And then we have Flame Blessed Bolt. So again, you want to be interacting early and often. Also, the Exile clause on Flame Blessed Bolt is important. I guess, you know, the interesting thing with a Braid is that when you see like Blood Fountain running around, or even a Blood Token, I don't use it to destroy Blood Tokens, but if you have to, but if you have to. It also takes out Dollhouse, which is a pretty bomby bomb, so a Braid's getting a lot of value for you. Over here, I'm guessing that this is going to be, ooh, Hungry Ridgewolf. I did not see that coming. All right, so Ridgewolf is what you're trying to do, just an aggressive 2-drop that potentially is a 3/2. Sounds great. It looks like Wolves are playing a little bit better in White-Red than people would have expected if we're seeing Hungry Ridgewolf, you know, a little bit ahead, actually, of Flame Blessed Bolt. Again, this is super small sample size. You're looking at, you know, short of 1,000 being played total, but something to keep an eye on. Next, we're going to have Sigarda's Imprisonment. Again, great card no matter what deck you're putting it in, it looks like. And then rounding out the top 5, Lacerate Flesh. So really just removal and a 2-drop. That's what you're doing in Boros. Removing threats, getting in. Kind of in this next tier, we're going to see Celebrants, which I think is a really busted, you know, top curve. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to Rakdos. And we're also looking at Sure Strike. So Early interaction, cheap interaction. Seems good. I think that a lot of times, especially if you're trying to deal with opponents' bombs, red isn't the best color to deal with them. Sure, you can imprison them, but a lot of your early interaction is cheap, and so it gets rid of cheap threats, whereas Sure Strike just forces them a lot of times to make awkward blocks if you've been aggressive enough early, and you can really get there. What's here? Fearful Villager, Heron Blessed Geist. I'm not putting a ton of stock into either of those, but obviously cards to consider. All right, moving on to our down. We're going to start with Fierce Retribution. Again, that just speaks to the aggressive nature of this deck. Probably one of the worst decks for Fierce Retribution. Boros is really just trying to get after it. Next up, we have Griff Rider. Wow, I think Griff Rider might be borderline unplayable if it's not doing well in Boros. That's a really bad sign. And then I'm guessing this is Perishblade Trainee. No, Drogskull Infantry. Ooh, it looks like Drogskull Infantry only kind of works in the Azorius Disturb deck. This is probably Perishblade Trainee here. No. Okay. I'm just going to stop guessing Perishblade Trainee. Great. Kindly Ancestor, performing about where you think it would be. It's not bad, not great. Blood Petal Celebrant. Kind of surprised there. It seemed like a decent aggressive 2-drop. I might be a little higher on this than the data is, but who knows. Evolving Wilds is best in this deck than any archetype we've seen so far. It is what it is. And hey, we got there. It's Perishblade Trainee. So, I mean, this is ostensibly one of your better training decks, and Trainee is really, I mean, sub 50% game in hand win rate. Not good at all. So, it looks like people are properly evaluating that. I don't really have a good feel for Boros yet, other than it's trying to turn things sideways, and that in general, you're looking for incidental blood so that you can just keep being aggressive. Either you're pitching lands or you're pitching 2-drops that just aren't going to impact the board anymore. Moving on, Selesnya. Wow, and this is, an example of not a lot of value over here in kind of the ether. People are pretty much nailing it. So up top we have Fierce Retribution. This is your Fierce Retribution deck. That is an amazing performer. And then we're going to see Sigarda's Imprisonment too. So definitely looking to be a little bit longer of a game, it looks like. Then we have Wolf Strike. So removal. You need ways to interact with you're playing Selesnya. Not really a big surprise. And then Spore Crawlers, so good value card here. This is just a creature that doesn't really help with any synergies. It's just a body that you can trade and, be up a card. Here we're going to start getting a little interesting. This is going to be Piercing Light again. So here you're looking at just a hallmark of what green has trouble doing, which is often interacting with your opponent's creatures. You're really only looking at Wolf Strike, so I love seeing Piercing Light as just a little bit higher than people probably would have pegged it at. And then Rural Recruit, which I think everybody was just like, yeah, this seems like a fairly good card. So just big to note that out of the top 5, 4 were interaction spells in Selesnya. Here, Massive Might, again, just cheap tricks. Great. Traveling Minister? Traveling Minister is just a good card. That's what we're finding out. All right, checks out. And then Heron Blessed Geist. Maybe just a little evasion is what you're looking for in this deck. Also seeing Toxic Scorpion. Surprisingly performing well here. I think people have been kind of down on it overall. We're seeing a lot of early misses. Chief among those is Drogskull Infantry. Again, okay, it looks like we were wrong about Drogskull Infantry, or we're not using it right. The data is just not sure how to interpret Disturb, but it seems like that's not a problem for Kindly Ancestors. Up here we have Griff Rider again. Stop playing Griff Rider, apparently. Kindly Ancestor. Okay, so this is just maybe the worst archetype for Disturb out of kind of white generic. Weaver of Blossoms. You're not really looking to ramp into things, it looks like. You're just kind of looking to curve out and interact. Perishblade Trainee is kind of pretty close to the line as, our 5th option here. Heron of Hope. Okay, so you're not really trying to gain a ton of life in this deck. You can, but it's certainly not a big focus. I'm interested to see that Traveling Minister high Heron of Hope low. Probably just speaks to the fact that you're looking to buff your creatures with Minister as opposed to really caring too much about the life. All right, Dimir up top. We're gonna guess Bleed Dry, and we're right. Of course, Bleed Dry, great removal. And we kind of have like a big gap between Bleed Dry and everything until we get to our good friend Diregraph Scavenger. Already talked about that. Just keep playing them. Up next, Grizzly Ritual. Okay, so you don't mind a little bit more expensive removal, it looks like in Dimir. My Aunt Jazz. I'm a baby. It also gives you blood tokens, which I think are just great. So, hey, listen, if you've got to have a little bit of expensive removal, go for it. You can have an early answer with Bleed Dry that's efficient and exiles. All the way in the back here, we're seeing Pointed Discussion. Again, small sample size theater, but I think people were off of kind of a 3-mana draw to in Midnight Haunt, where it looks like it might be back, and that this is a card that should be kind of right over in this zone. So going, 5 picks higher than it is right now. And then we're seeing Chill the Grave. Makes sense. Synergizes with zombie things that you're doing in Dimir, and just replaces itself cantrips for 2. Great card. Here we kind of like everything's right about where you'd think it'd be in terms of Courier Bet's a little bit of a surprise to me, overperforming. I don't know how exactly people are getting life, but they're doing it. Where are people gaining this life? Scattered Thoughts, Undying Malice, and Siphon Essence. This looks like an archetype that people are still kind of misunderstanding. You're seeing a lot of value going late in the draft. Let's see, we're looking at like Retrieval, it's just cheap bounce. Dreadlight Monstrosity playing a little bit better, playing like it's a few picks higher. Whereas, what are we missing on? And these aren't bad misses, but Gift of Fangs, and people looking for cheap interaction and just not getting there. I think probably just because Rakdos has been, oh my god, I wasn't sure if I was recording. If you saw a look of terror in my face just then. Gift of Fangs, I think, is probably just, this reflects more of the fact that Rakdos Vampires have been very good. And then Desperate Farmer, Lantern Bearer, just fine. Here, this is a pretty significant drop for Blood Crazed Socialite. So it's interesting because I think that this might just reflect people aren't using blood tokens correctly. They're trying to get the pump when I think you'd rather just have the ability to pitch a card, but something to note. And then Gluttonous Guest. So that's interesting. We're seeing a couple of blood cards that are here that people are whiffing on. So I'm guessing, I'm curious what this is. Way down here, Ragged Recluse. So this just tells me that people are trying to run blood packages in Dimir, and that is not what this deck wants to be doing. The things that look successful are more tempo-based. Your Chill to the Grave, or Chill of the Grave, your Alchemist Retrieval. It seems like doing tempo kind of plays and combat tricks doing pretty well for you, and then just re-up with Pointed Discussion. All right, moving on to Izzet, we have another huge valuation error, it looks like early for players, and that is Ancestral Anger. Wow, this is an off-the-charts great card in Izzet that is going way too late. Looks like that's about, you should expect to see Ancestral Anger at 11th pick when it plays as the best card in this archetype. Wild stuff. I guess I haven't really played a lot of Izzet, but I guess if I'm getting Ancestral Angers late, let's give it a shot. That looks busted. Next up, we're going to see Flameblessed Bolt, playing a little bit better than a Braid over here. So that's kind of interesting. And then kind of in the middle, Chill the Grave. So again, you're looking to do tempo things and cast spells. Obviously, you're in Izzet. And Scattered Thoughts. So we have no creatures really in the top 5. We have an Epicure. Epicure right now, ultimate low sample size theater at 281 plays, but wow, this deck wants to be super aggressive. So you're basically just going to cast a bunch of like 1 and 2 drops, hit them with every Ancestral Anger that you can, and clear out any early attacker or any early blockers with Flameblessed Bolt and a Braid. That's fascinating. This is a deck I can't wait to try on stream as soon as I'm done seal testing. Rounding it out, we're going to see Lantern Bearer, which again, aggressive one drops, and Ancestral Anger. Sounds good. And then we're also seeing Reckless Impulse, Alchemist Retrieval. This is a super sweet deck. What's playing poorly? Celebrant? Kind of surprised on that. Maybe you just want to be oops all one drops. Cruel Witness, which, okay, that seems like it's a little bit late and a little bit mana hungry. You're not really looking to bin a bunch of stuff and get value off of having spells in your graveyard per se. So I would adjust Cruel Witness to a little bit later in your pick order. We're also seeing Binding Geist and Lacerate Flesh. So Lacerate Flesh just being a little bit too expensive. You're hoping your combat tricks are going to do what ultimately you're trying to do with the Lacerate Flesh. And Binding Geist, I'm kind of surprised about Binding Geist as well. This should be moving way, way later. Huh. It seems like it would fit with what you're trying to do. But I guess if there's a blocker there, you're kind of mad? Who knows? And then all the way down to the bottom, we've got Belligerent Guest, which is kind of a surprise to me because I thought that you wanted all the blood you could get. And just be able to maybe even like filter through, rummage out some of your ancestral angers. But wow, that's really low. I mean, this is one of the worst Izzet commons. It's on par with Serpentine Ambush. Woo! Interesting. So Izzet, that's my standout deck so far of something that I cannot wait to try. In Simic, another one where we're seeing a huge outlier over here in Massive Might. Okay, so, just a cheap combat trick. What else can we learn about this? Obviously, you want Wolf Strike, interaction important, so a couple of kind of cheap spells. Then we've got Flourishing Hunter here. Huh. So you're just looking to kind of play a later game. If this is one of your top commons, you don't mind things going long. Simic looks like it's going to be about value, kind of grindy. Syncopate so that you have answers early. So what's this going to be? Lantern Bearer. Interesting. This deck is all over the place. Hookhand Mariner, some more mid-range value. So really, your Lantern Bearer is going to be kind of sending your big dummies to the air, it looks like, in Hunter and Mariner. And then over here, Sporeback Wolf. I don't feel like this is something that's really been fleshed out yet. I don't know. It seems like it's not a very great deck. Not gonna lie. Over here we have Weaver. So again, really, Weaver's going way, way too high. This is average taken at. Cruel Witness and Sporecrawler kind of in the same zone. I'm surprised to see Sporecrawler down here. I figured that was exactly what this deck's looking to do. Huh, maybe it's just, what are we seeing on the plus side? Scattered Thoughts, Cradle of Safety, Millipede is playing better, and Witch's Web. This is just kind of like counter stuff early and hope to make it to the late game where your Flourishing Hunters can save your butt. All right, Simic, you're a mystery to me. The card that everybody is the most off on, Dawnheart Disciple. Yeah, you're just not playing a lot of really quality humans, it looks like. So, all right, moving on to Rakdos. I think kind of early favorite deck. And sure, like Bleed Dry is slightly under just because the deck's winning so damn much. Got a Braid here. Diregraph Scavenger again makes sense. Falconwrath Celebrants. Now, I just essentially think that if you can create 2 blood tokens, you gotta create 2 blood tokens. Whenever you get the opportunity, make 2 blood. It essentially just reads like, hey, this is a clue. Like, draw a card. And to get that on a 4/4 Menace for 5, really good stuff. Another kind of outlier, Reckless Impulse. Reckless Impulse playing about as well as Flame Blessed Bolt. So I think that that's really important to note that this deck's looking for ways to replenish its hand. A lot of times you're going to be pitching lands and, just whatever flotsam you have to your blood tokens. So, Reckless Impulse, not nothing. There aren't a ton of underperformers in this deck, obviously. I mean, you're playing Flame Blessed Bolt. Gift of Fangs is kind of interesting, is coming in a little bit higher. Desperate Farmer, Blood Petal Celebrant, and then Courier Bat Doom Dissenter. So you're just seeing cards that don't really synergize with the game plan in Bat Dissenter. Celebrant's a little bit of a surprise, and like Farmer isn't necessarily what you're trying to do. So all in all, I think most people have figured out and talked ad nauseum about how to draft Rakdos. So we'll move on. Second to last deck is Golgari, and woo, people are having a tough time with this one. So our top common is Flourishing Hunter. Makes sense. You're just classic kind of mid-range value. Make it till the late game. Way over here, we have Witch's Web. So interesting. You're looking at, I'd call this kind of surprise fight spell. You're untap and ambush something. So what are we Witch's Webbing? What's our target here? Blood Fountain, again, you're just getting value out of that. Wolf Strike and Bleed Dry, kind of in this next group. Rural Recruit. Okay, so Recruit and I guess Witch's Web makes sense. It doesn't seem awful. You send in with your Recruit and your Boar, whichever one needs to survive gets the web. And then you've got just kind of a cluster here of what people think should be right. I don't see anything that's going to be like mind-blowing. Interesting that Diregraph Scavenger is a little bit worse in this deck than it's playing in others, but yeah. In terms of what we're missing, Gift of Fangs, yeah, again, just probably Rakdos being better than we expected. Not a Desperate Farmer deck. Not a Weaver deck. Weaver looks like people have just been too high on it in general. So interesting to note. Doom Dissenter and Courier Bat kind of rounding it out. Again, non-synergistic. It seems like these are cards that people are just tossing maybe in the wrong decks. So. And then cards that people seem to be playing a lot. Sporeback Wolf and Toxic Scorpion. Ooh, Toxic Scorpion looking real bad down here. I don't know. Overall, I don't have a good feel for Golgari yet, and I don't feel like you're missing out if you're not drafting Golgari particularly well. Just don't draft the Butts deck, as far as I can tell. Butts seems like they're a lie. Butts are lies. Don't tell Sir Mix-a-Lot. All right, top common in Gruul is Wolf Strike. Of course it is. We're striking. And then we're going to have a Braid and Flame Blessed Bolt. Here's a surprise, though. It's kind of on this pretty much even with Flame Blessed Bolt is one of our last picks, and that is Ancestral Anger. Interesting. So this makes sense because you're doing wolfy things and you want to give them a little bit of reach. You don't want them to get just chumped into oblivion. So the Ancestral Anger Gruul deck looks like it is popping. Again, small sample size, but I'm interested to check that out. And then we're looking at Hookland Mariner, makes sense, and Flourishing Hunter. So you don't mind a higher curve. You're not going turbo aggro with this, but that's kind of your top 5. And then Lacerate Flesh, again, a little bit longer game, can play that. And Fearful Villager, which has just overall been better than I kind of expected. Playing a little bit under what we would expect. I'm guessing this is Weaver. It is Weaver. We don't like Weaver. Way worse than we would expect is Blood Petal Celebrant. Just not, you don't need to be this aggressive. So good to know. We're going to see Apprentice Sharpshooter under. I don't think anybody's like clamoring to get Sharpshooter in their decks. And then way down here, Belligerent Guest. Okay. So it's like just underneath my chair. Belligerent Guest, maybe just a bad common. And people are like, well, I want my blood. And you don't want your blood. Behind my chair, cards that you would expect them to be there. I'm just looking to see if there's anything that was super wonky with Gruul, but we're not seeing it. Overall, this has been a really fun exercise. I think decks kind of were what we thought they were. I cannot wait to go try that Izzet deck. Maybe I will try and get that streaming in a little bit here. Next week, we'll be back with just kind of the regular 5 up, 5 down format where I look at game in hand win rate from kind of this 7 days, the opening 7 days of the format versus the week that followed, and see where the shifts are happening, see which cards are overperforming versus underperforming, because as always, this is going to keep shifting, and if you're a limited grinder, you have to stay on top of what the latest tech is. I've been Uncle Cardboard. Thanks so much for tuning in. Like, subscribe, I have to say it, and I'll see you again next week. Hey everybody, it's your favorite uncle, reminding you to check out the Open Draft Project, where I sit down with your favorite pros, streamers, and limited grinders. They do the exact same draft seed, and then we see what's going on in their heads. If you are brand new to draft, or you're like me and draft way too much, there's always something that you can take away from this series where we talk to some of the greatest draft minds in the world. Check it out.